Okay. Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining our first session in the series of four Whole House Repair Program webinars. I'm Catherine Lee, Director of Client Services with Green and Healthy Homes Initiative. I'm joined by my colleague at GHHI, Justin Berry, the Senior Analyst for Climate, Energy, and Equity. And we also have a guest we're very excited to join in on this conversation, Alon Abramson, Vice President of Residential Programs at Philadelphia Energy Authority. As we get started, there's some housekeeping notes in the chat. We're recording today's session. We will share the recording, link to the recording by email to all of our registrants, and we'll also have the link available on the GHHI website as soon as we're able to upload it. Participants today are going to be able to share questions and comments using the Q&A feature in Zoom. And we also are going to ask that we to collect some of your feedback through some pre and post session surveys. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our pre-survey right now to give everyone a couple minutes to respond to that as folks are joining us. There we go. And everyone should have that window open to respond to some questions about what you know already about whole house and electrification programs. And as people are replying to that, just a little bit of information about today's session. So you know what to expect. We're going to share some information that Green and Healthy Homes Initiative has been working to collect in a training guide that we'll be sharing via email and social media very soon about whole house repair programs. That training guide has information about the national need for the whole house model, opportunities to implement programs, and the value of that for our communities, especially low income, low and moderate income households and communities with a high level of need for housing interventions. We, in that training guide, also have three city level case studies on programs that are implementing the whole house model, one of which is Philadelphia, which is why we're very excited for Alon to join us today in this conversation. The other two are Trenton, New Jersey, and our program, our electrification pilot that GHHI leads up in Baltimore. So we look forward to sharing that out with you as soon as it's available. And, we're going to be referring to it throughout this series. So, look forward to having the PDF of that soon. We've got some slides today to give you a little bit of a preview of that. And then we're going to talk to Alon about the Philadelphia's Built to Last program design. We have a lot of time set aside after our moderated discussion for questions. So we're really hoping that we get questions from the audience as we go through our discussion. Please feel free to submit that. And Justin is going to be monitoring the Q&A so we can have those, discussion points or questions from all of you ready to go as soon as we do our overview. So I think, let's see how we're doing on participation. Give another minute or so, and then I'll close out the poll and we can switch over to the slides. Justin, do we have any questions at this point?
Not a question, but a hello from Anthony Santiago.
Oh, hi, Anthony. Glad you could join us. I was hoping we would have some New Jersey participants today, so very glad that you're here. We have, for our last question in the survey, it looks like it was about what people are most interested in learning about today, Alon. So we've got options of if people are interested in learning about how programs are grading funding streams, what workforce training and capacity building efforts support implementation, how program administrators are assessing feasibility of electrifying homes as part of a whole house model, and how programs are measuring outcomes. We also have options for all of the above and none of the above, and well more than half of our audience says all the above. So I think we can just jump in wherever you're feeling like you want to get in and talk about the details of program design. So, we'll make sure you have time for a good overview before we dig into some of our prepared questions. All right, y'all. Well, I'm going to close out the poll. Thank you so much for your responses. And I will switch over into our opening. Share my screen. All right. Upload. There we go. Does that look good, Justin?
Looks great.
Okay, good deal. Well, again, welcome. We're so happy that everyone's been able to join us that signed up. Again, we're hoping that you can make as many of these sessions in person as possible so we can have good discussion. But we'll also be sharing out all of our webinar links so you can see sessions in case you have to miss some. For those of you who may not know Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, we are an organization with our flagship location in Baltimore. We're a national healthy housing organization with a vision to advance the social determinants of health and racial equity through healthy housing. We're dedicated to addressing the social determinants of health and the advancement of racial and health equity through the creation of healthy, safe, and energy efficient homes. By delivering a standard of excellence in our work, we aim to eradicate negative health impacts of unhealthy housing and unjust policies for children, seniors, and families to ensure better health, economic, and social outcomes in historically disinvested communities with an emphasis on communities of color. And today we're here to talk about the whole house model, which is something that we have a history of developing, starting really in 2008 with a call from the White House to support integration of programs for weatherization assistance and lead poisoning prevention, lead hazard reduction, and healthy homes. We have been able to, through alignment of other programs, really build out that model to support a broader implementation and a more comprehensive scope of work as we've done that. So we're really here to lift up some best practices that we have found in the work that we've done across the country through our own offices, our own initiatives, and also with our partners at the local and state levels in where we work. So the webinar series really has been designed to train participants to access and align, braid, and coordinate resources so communities can scale decarbonization, electrification measures as part of that whole house program design. So as we go through our webinar series, we're going to talk about some kind of core themes, I think, across all of the programs that we feature in our case studies. The first being policies, what's enabling alignment of electrification with hazard reduction programs, as well as healthy housing and other energy efficiency programs. Who's doing the work and how that's happening across agencies is also critically important. And so we talk about partners in funding, particularly funding streams, agencies that are leading work to take that collaborative approach, and how that's enabling comprehensive assessments of units, comprehensive scopes of work, and how we're able to integrate all those different services together in a streamlined process. We're also going to talk about lessons learned, identifying barriers to implementation of this model, and how communities can determine strategies to eliminate those barriers, which I think our discussion about Built to Last. We'll have some really great examples of that today. I'm excited to get into. And we also, will talk about how programs are evaluating their outcomes at the household level and also at the programmatic level, and thinking through the broader impacts of, health outcomes, the related social and economic security outcomes for communities, as well as how we're seeing an impact on decarbonization measures at the community level, which are all really exciting, I think, for all of us who are here and engaged in these discussions. And lastly, we'll be talking about community engagement, which is really critical, really at every step of program planning and implementation. But I think we've got some great examples throughout the series to lift up of how community residents are being engaged in program design, designing out program marketing efforts, as well as education happening at the household and community levels around these different topics, and how community engages in evaluation of programs. So sharing just a few quick slides with everyone that will be available. This data will be available in our training guide, just some infographics to share with you. Have some kind of definitions around need, what we mean by whole house, and some other kind of data indicators on the opportunities to do, the work that we're describing at the local level. So nationally, when we think about the need for healthy, resilient, and affordable housing, we know that we have a lot of households in need, and depending on how you define it, just millions really of households that are exposed to unhealthy air, that are at risk of severe damages from environmental threats and the challenges that come with climate change in our communities and frontline communities. And we also, through assessments through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, these are data points from their reports, we know that there are millions of households that have serious health and safety hazards that need to be addressed in homes. And that have significant structural problems. We also know that many of those same households are inefficient, and for the reason, first because of structural issues and other just investment needs. And because of that, our residential energy use accounts for about 20% of our total national energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. A big culprit for that in a lot of our residential buildings is heating and cooling systems that are malfunctioning, in some cases unsafe and outdated. So we know with investment in housing, we can make a serious impact on reducing those carbon emissions, but also reducing the impact of unhealthy housing on families and our healthcare systems overall. If we're able to invest in homes to keep people in healthier, safer housing, we will also be reducing lead poisoning, we will be better controlling asthma, and we will reduce rates of injuries and accidents, which will save us, on average, or as a conservative estimate at this point, $174 billion a year in healthcare costs. So the approach for whole house is also very grounded in a need for a more equitable approach to structuring housing repair programs to ensure that people are not left out of housing programs because they have, a complex housing repair and intervention needs. So, again, we know that a lot of communities are in need of investments in their occupied housing, but the burdens of that are, much more significant in low-income households, communities of color, and as we'll talk about, renter households obviously have more structural barriers to participating in many of these programs, just because of the nature of their relationship with the property owner. So, these are things that we're tracking in terms of the where we need to lift up a more comprehensive model that will reach sometimes hard to reach communities. So again, when we talk about and define whole house, we are really just talking about, a definition that we have as a working definition is the integration of health, safety, energy efficiency, electrification, and decarbonization, and housing repair services as much as possible and tailored to community needs and the household needs, for the households that are being enrolled in programs. So this is a model that's been, GHHI is championed, and because we see the impact that it can make to take away some of the issues that families have in facing barriers in getting enrolled in programs. So we'll talk again about some of the program elements and how implementation is happening, how communities are able to braid funding streams, come up with processes for having a coordinated intake process for families and, hopefully a one-stop shop, as we'll talk about with Built to Last. Coordinating to do comprehensive assessments of properly phased scope of work when we're talking about lead, weatherization, electrification measures. The kind of order of operation becomes really important, and some other things like resident education, workforce training, data sharing, and outcomes evaluation. But the nuts and bolts of the work being performed in units, may change place to place. But in terms of a comprehensive scope, we're typically talking about some combination of structural repairs and retrofits, environmental hazard remediation, and energy efficiency and electrification measures. So again, as we go through our training series, we're going to be talking about 3 programs: the Baltimore Electrification Pilot Program at GHHI, a Trenton Electrification Pilot Program that GHHI is also implementing, but with a different partnership model through the state New Jersey Board of Public Utilities Comfort Partners Energy Efficiency Program. So we'll be talking about that in our next session. But today we're going to be talking about Billy and the Built to Last program. So just a few statistics that you'll see in our training guide. Won't get into this, so we can switch over and start talking about the program. But just to give you an idea of some of the data indicators we're looking at when we talk about community needs, we're talking about housing cost burdens, the age and the quality of the housing stock. We're also looking, and we'll be discussing median energy burdens and, how communities are impacted by the cost of their utilities and how that factors into what we're doing. We'll also look at environmental health indicators, things like the average age of the population and, how many older adults are living with disabilities and may be at risk for injuries and accidents. Pediatric asthma prevalence, which can be an indicator of need to invest in indoor air quality improvements, and prevalence of lead poisoning. So some other kind of community-based information that we want to make sure that people have access to is what opportunities we have to invest in residential energy efficiency improvements and also decarbonization electrification measures. So you'll see that these are just some data points from Department of Energy database dashboard that has some measurements of what the kind of current and near future energy consumption is by category in communities, showing that there's a significant amount of residential energy use in Philadelphia County. And we have these for all of our communities that we're featuring in this. So I'm not trying to call anyone out, but we're looking at the types of fuel and the opportunities, again, to invest in decarbonization measures. And if we're able to, pull into our energy efficiency programs, fuel savings measures that will make a big impact on reducing energy costs. So we can see that there's some, scopes of work, that could have the potential to be done already through a lot of our weatherization assistance type programs that would make a big impact. So with that, I'm going to ask Alon to jump in, and I will stop sharing that screen. And Alon, if you can just please start us off with talking about Philadelphia Energy Authority and some elements of the program design for Built to Last to get us set up.
Yeah, that's perfect. Could I share my screen
Absolutely.
too? Yeah.
Let me make sure that you have permission to do that.
I do.
Okay.
At least it's not stopping me. So
okay, good.
yeah. So okay. So actually I'll start with, you're right, give a little bit of context though from some of the questions I saw in the chat. Some of you seem to be familiar with the Energy Authority, at least our work in Pennsylvania. But let me start by introducing myself. Alon Abramson. I'm the Vice President of Residential Programs at the Philadelphia Energy Authority. We are a creature of very specific government structure in Pennsylvania. We're a municipal authority created by our city council and mayor back in 2010. And really, this slide, this is what we're trying to do. We are, as an authority, taking a long view of how we kind of implement energy efficiency citywide, and are looking at that as a tool for impact in the city. So a lot of the work we do is supporting city contracts. So right now we're replacing 120,000 streetlights in the city, for example, with LEDs. And so like that's like the ostensible purpose of an energy authority. But we are an independent agency, and so our one of the big things that we're trying to do is look at energy as a way to improve energy equity, use it as a vehicle for economic development and job creation, and also, while we're doing that, alleviate poverty and improve public health. And that's all kind of wrapped into the work we're doing with Built to Last, this whole home repair program. And then also note, like, kind of our model here and the way we work is that trying to stimulate energy, like the demand for these kinds of services, right? Built to Last, this whole home repair concept obviously requires a lot of repair work. And this is like broadly, right? It's not just the energy efficiency work, but basic systems work, health and safety improvements. All of that requires a lot of worker time as well. So the idea here is that if we can increase the demand for this work, increase the kind of the throughput of the service, then we also are stimulating the demand for the workers. And so there is also kind of a job program that's associated with Built to Last, and I know there's an interest in talking about workforce development, so hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to talk about that. But on the whole, what we're talking about with this whole home concept is, again, stabilizing homes to begin with so that we can get in and do the work I think that a lot of us are interested in, which is energy improvements, resilience, but that really does start with making sure that the home itself is sound, right? So a lot, and I mean like most of the homes we start with or we work with start with roofs, but then also electrical, plumbing, and basic HVAC repairs are something we see very commonly. Talk about, like, this isn't us doing all this work, it's really a coordination effort, but this is the work that we're coordinating, getting done. So basic systems, health and safety, and energy efficiency are then the next priorities. And these are kind of a Venn diagram of elements, right? So when we talk about roofs, we can talk about what insulation in that roof, solarizing, white roof coating, but just trying to categorize these things. And then we are also kind of trying to push things a bit past where traditional repair programs have done, like, worked in the past. So thinking about fuel switching from fossil fuel equipment to electric equipment, talking about heat pumps, and also solar wherever that's possible. So I just want to kind of paint the picture of like what we mean when we talk about the whole home. And what we're doing, and again, a lot of like I think this is the point of this conversation, right? Is like, how do we layer together services, right? There is a lot of demand, but there's also there's a lot that needs to be done in a low income home because there's usually a lot of deferred maintenance that we're kind of starting with. It's very difficult to find new funding sources that will pay for all of that at one shot. Also in Pennsylvania, and likely in other places where you all are, you start to run into challenges around prevailing wage. Davis-Bacon may apply in some cases as well. Federal funding. For us in Pennsylvania, as soon as we hit $25,000 of spending with most pools of funding, if they have any kind of government ties, we're talking about starting to pay prevailing wage. And in Philadelphia, that is exceptionally, that's much, much more expensive than the traditional rates for residential contractors. So that, on top of compliance costs, mean that as soon as we cross that $25,000 threshold, we are finding projects are much less affordable. So that's one of the big incentives for us. And the other is that there are already a ton of existing services in Philadelphia. We traditionally are regularly are working with at least 7 different programs that were already there before we ever showed up. They already have a ton of infrastructure in place to help people apply for their programs, do assessments, do installations. So we really want to take advantage of that infrastructure as well. So, where our goal is to kind of do this whole home repair and do that by taking advantage of all the resources that are already there. The way we are approaching that is through these kind of 3 elements. First up, of course, is to ensure that people qualify for these different services. So we, when we started off, basically took it upon ourselves to create a single application process. So we can take a client, walk them through, all the data, collection on demographics and, family composition, income, all of that information, collecting any documentation that's required. Some things for us, we collect utility bills and utility authorizations to collect utility information for the next couple of years after the project. And very importantly, a data release so that we can share all that information with all of our partners. So once somebody, that application is complete, we can share that information with all the services that will, also match up with that client. And then when our next step is to go out to the home and understand kind of what the needs are there. And then we can actually match those 2 things up, right? So if we know that this household qualifies for weatherization, for utility programs, they might qualify for the Basic Systems Repair Program in Philadelphia that's funded by HUD. CDBG funds, whatever it is, we know that they're able to enroll in that program. We get them signed up for it, and then we basically go to that program and tell them we have seen a need for your services in this home, and then get them to say yes, we will do that work on this project. And we have service providers that basically do that matchmaking and do the coordination work so that this whole home work can happen. So that's the sort of third part, is the construction management element. Obviously, coordinating multiple services, and we're also bringing additional funding from our side to fill in any gaps. And this is really critical. We talk all the time about how we do not want to be creating a new repair program. That's the last thing we want to do. Really just trying to make sure that people can access what's already there. But sometimes that means plugging holes so that those programs can actually work to begin with. So I think a classic example that many of you, I'm sure, have run into is that weatherization can't do work if there's mold in the home, if there's asbestos, if there's, inaccessible basement, whatever it might be. That's a place where either we're going to bring in a partner to kind of take care of those issues, or we ourselves are going to fill in that gap. And, when it comes to things like fuel switching, our electric utility cannot switch somebody from gas to electric. It's a constraint in Pennsylvania, but we can, right? With unrestricted funding, we can do that work. And solar power is another place where there is not an existing program except for the one that we run. So we can kind of layer that in as well. Hopefully that all makes sense. So last piece, just the way this looks, we really do try to think about this from the client's perspective, right? The biggest impact of all of this is that the client themselves does not have to figure out where do they have to apply for first. How do they know that they walked in the right door and they didn't, apply for weatherization when they had, some kind of, issue that prevented them from actually getting that service. So folks complete our interest form. We then work with them. Currently have a huge wait for our interest form for our program in general, but so we get people on our wait list. Once they're at the front of the line, we can complete intake with them, we send a home inspector to the site. We then kind of develop a scope of work, and we kind of finalize that both internally for anything that we fund, and also with any of our partners. We get participants to sign off on that work, and then we get the contractors out to complete the work and do quality assurance and get signed off on that on the project. So that's where I'm going to stop with the PowerPoint, and now I'm going to just kind of talk right at you all. And
Hey, it sounds
hopefully
good.
that lays the groundwork of what the program is. And but if anybody has any questions, please drop them in the Q&A. I'm trying to keep up with that as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alon. So yeah, to kick off the conversation, I wanted to ask if you could talk about sort of to continue that conversation about the client experience prior to Built to Last. There were definitely some barriers that low-income residents of the city were experiencing if they wanted to access programs that Philadelphia Energy Authority had for residential programs. So, I think that's been a part of your program model, is thinking through how to remove some of those barriers. So can you talk about some of that client experience prior to the program?
Right. Yeah. And just to be clear, yeah, not issues accessing our programs, but issues accessing programs in general. Right. Yeah.
Yes,
So
yes.
yes. Yeah, there are many. So there's a lot to unpack in this, but I alluded to a lot of it, to part of this, which is what happens traditionally with kind of this service offering is that folks sign up and they may not understand what they're actually eligible for based on their income, because I think we all know that things like area median income or federal poverty level are fairly opaque to regular people. And so, it's sort of like cast a wide net. I think that's what we see with our clients, is that they sign up for our program, they sign up for weatherization, they sign up for basic systems repair, they sign up for anything that they possibly can, just hoping that if you throw enough darts, like something's going to stick. So that's like one of the pieces that, I think generally having a single application point really helps with. We have a bit more capacity with the intake side to kind of help people like work through that piece. So, if somebody submits paperwork that is expired or, otherwise would have gotten them kind of rejected from a program, we have a little bit more capacity to go back to them and ensure that they are actually submitting the right thing. So they're not going to be denied the service just from like a kind of bureaucratic standpoint. And we do see that is one of the challenges. We have some program partners where we ourselves are going back and forth with them essentially on the client's behalf. And we have there's a bit more transparency in us being a government agency versus a client, the client trying to interact with a kind of a larger bureaucracy. So that's like one thing that I think is easy to kind of overlook, is just how difficult it is for a client to actually access the service, like even at the baseline before a contractor or an inspector even walks through the door, which is then the next place where, we do see those issues. And that's the piece that I talked about, where, they're going to see, some home condition that is going to preclude, the service offering. And I think, again, weatherization is the easiest one to point to, because they really can't work when there's environmental hazards, right? They can't conduct a blower door test, and they can't really do any air sealing in a home where, mold or, asbestos or, any kind of environmental exposure could be like actually augmented by that work. So I think having basically Built to Last does a lot of things, but one thing that is like really critical is basically serving as like a pre-weatherization or kind of an enabling upgrade program that like makes sure that services can happen. Then the last piece I'll mention is just is kind of the overcost issue. So, and this happens a lot with our basic systems repair program, which is really robust, and they are spending up to that $25,000 cap. But even they get projects where, and we just had one in our inbox this morning, where there's a basic condition that is just too expensive for them to even approach. So there could be a roof repair that's $30,000, just that piece. And that they have to just walk away from that. But we can always come in and divide that cost up between our two programs and be able to move that project forward. So it is a kind of a way to, in a lot of cases, actually save homes from total loss, which is really nice to see.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's, as we all, I think, hope to get to that point where there aren't those sort of walk away issues because of high costs.
Sure.
So well, great. Well, wanted to ask you something. You spoke about it early on in your comments, sort of the the Philadelphia Energy Authority's role and sort of the city approach to decarbonization measures. We talk a little bit more about how the city climate goals have impacted your work, and I think highlighted the need to have these, the program integration whole house design as a part of the city's climate goals for becoming carbon free. And I think 2050, if that, I'm remembering that correctly.
We have a series of goals. I think there's a
Yeah.
2030 goal as well as a 2050. 80 by 50, I think, is where we stand at the moment.
Okay.
Hard to keep up. So I think, yes, it is very important to have climate goals. So let's just say that first. And if you're coming from a place that doesn't have those, I think it does help rally political support, because once you set some number of goals, then you have to talk about the practicality of actually achieving that. And in our case, I think it puts a big spotlight on the low income side specifically, because I think the one thing that you cannot argue about is that there is a large cost associated with whatever your metric is, carbon reduction or energy efficiency, clean energy, whatever it is, there is an investment that needs to happen. There are mechanisms to prompt the the market rate homeowner to adopt those measures. Tax credits is a big one that we see, right? Where we're trying to make these things more accessible, more affordable. But I think the one place that often gets left behind, and we want to make sure it does not get left behind, is the low income space, where there's not ready capital, there's not access to credit. As you can see by the fact that there's like a lot of deferred maintenance, just basic maintenance on homes. We can't ask these households to also kind of make the investments in the climate goals that we have as a city. So we have to be there to support them. And yeah, depending on what your goals are, if your goal is as a city is to get to high levels of electrification, and in a place like Philadelphia where like 75% of homes are heated with gas, then you can push for that in a lot of ways. But again, if you are not directly supporting those low income households to get there with you, you are really risking them being the ones left behind. So yeah, it's so starting from the 80 by 50 goal, and then kind of like mapping that out for our policymakers is like a really compelling way to talk about like the need for additional funding to actually make that happen.
Yeah.
And like it's a very politically salient, just in general, like this question of like the need for like home repairs in general, right? That's like it's a very, very strong political like movement, and we see a lot of support for that with like, community groups and others. And so I think then it's about like, if we're going to invest in repair, shouldn't we also be thinking about the affordability of these homes? If we're making a repair of one kind, like we should be thinking about like what the energy impact of that repair is, or like if you're going to invest $5,000, but with $5,500 you can also assure that it's going to be more affordable for that household, or it's going to help you with your climate goals. Like is that like, should we like not make that additional investment? I think that's also part of the conversation.
Absolutely. Yep, for sure. Great. Let's shift over to talking about some of the impact measurement that you've done. I mean, we've got some outcomes evaluation on the pilot that we'll be sharing out with everyone. But I know you've gotten, and we've discussed some feedback that you've received from the participants of the program. And what you're hearing in terms of the direct benefits, impacts of the investments that Built to Last has enabled in homes. And I think something that was really interesting that you and I talked about initially is the interest that the participants have had in heat pumps and some of the electrification measures that have really been beneficial to households in Philadelphia. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Where to start? So just in general, let me just kind of like answer the high level of like, what does evaluation look like and what impacts are we seeing? So the way we're approaching the kind of evaluation of the program is with surveying. There's two pieces. There's on the quantitative side, as I mentioned up front, we are collecting utility authorizations from clients. And so we can, go through and do kind of utility tracking, so we can see if there's any pre-post change on spending. But that is a very imperfect metric for this, for this cohort, right? I think when you're talking about households that are very low income with a lot of deferred maintenance, Often we're seeing utility spend that's just capped at like artificially just based on what is affordable, right? So people will, not run their heat at some, or like if they're fuel oil customers, right, they won't refill their heat, their fuel oil tank once it runs out. And in winter, even if it's, even if it's January or December, or, and in the summer, there's, insufficient cooling as well. So if what we see is a net neutral utility spend at the end of a project, but we have increased actual accessibility to heating and cooling, like we don't want to count that as a loss or like as a miss for our project. So while we do look at utility costs pre and post, we're not saying that no utility savings means we have somehow not succeeded in this project. And I will say that we sometimes are not even able to get very deep on our energy work in these projects. And, even when we compile, put all these different funds together, what we get to is just a baseline of stabilizing the project or the property. And that too is, not necessarily a loss for us, that we have still preserved that affordable housing. So, that's on the quantitative side. On the qualitative side, we do, conduct surveys. We ask about, the client's view, their kind of perception on, how healthy their home feels, especially if they have chronic illness, if they've seen any improvement. We ask about whether the home, if they are perceiving that it's more affordable for utilities or otherwise to be in the home. A few other metrics I'm kind of blanking on, but I know it'll be shared out in the report. But generally what we're seeing is across the board on these qualitative surveys, we are seeing, really like strong like responses and like very favorable responses to the work. And I think we also do ask about just like generally like how is this program, how is it to like work within this program versus like what you see in general, and like that too, like the client experience piece is like we're seeing like really strong response to just a really favorable response to just the ease of access to the Built to Last service, that kind of coordination element. Yeah, I think I don't want to get into numbers. I think all that stuff is in the report, but in general, it's just like high marks all across. And, we have also received, some critical feedback on some just elements of, rolling out a relatively new program. And all of that is also really helpful for us to just make kind of continuous improvements in program design and the offering. We don't shy away from that feedback. So.
Which is very important to have that ongoing feedback loop, I think, and be able to respond to it. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. Last question I'll ask before we open it up to audience is, and for those of you who don't know, the Commonwealth, of Pennsylvania, adopted a statewide whole home program that was enabled through state legislation. They appropriated some of their American Rescue Plan Act funds to launch that program and allocate to counties who are interested in implementing the whole house model for a lot of the same reasons that Built to Last did the pilot program. And it's been overwhelmingly, I would say, successful, huge level of interest in pretty much every county where it's operating. Alon, are you in communication with any of the other municipalities or areas that are implementing that? Are you hearing from other partners about this? And do you think that'll be something that will be sustained in the future?
Ooh, good question. Yeah. So, and it's I saw some early questions asking about this as well, or at least in this vein. So first off, yeah, the Commonwealth legislation basically took the Built to Last program and said, how do we scale this up to the state? And they basically repurposed some ERA funds that were left over, some COVID recovery dollars, $120 million, so I say some, pretty sizable amount, and then distributed that essentially formula funding across the state. And I do think it was like very successful. I think it was like 95% of counties across the state did, accept the funds and, move forward with programs. And I think a good number have already spent all their allocation. Part of that is that $120 million spread across 50-something counties. And in a formula sense, some counties got very little funding, $500,000 or so, which does not really, offer a lot of, doesn't do a ton. I think others found, that it was, more sizable, but, the upstart cost of, new program design and all of that was also kind of a bit of a challenge. So I think with these kinds of things, like, they're great, but seeing some assurance that the funding will continue is really important. And this is really a little bit of a not happy news in the Commonwealth, is that for the last 2 years, even though the governor has been very supportive of that renewing and huge legislative support. And in fact, this passing in the budget, it has been held up through, in the sort of budget negotiation and kind of fiscal, well, this past year, it was, I think, struck from the budget in general, and entirely the year before it was passed into the budget, but then trapped in kind of the fiscal code.
Yeah.
And essentially it's like known to be a Democratic, like, desire. And so it's kind of become a little bit of a political football, unfortunately. But all to say that, like, we have not seen renewed funding for the program. And so that's made it very difficult for other counties to really keep the programs going. And so they've sort of reverted back to, what they had before that infusion of capital.
Yeah.
And in Philadelphia, we're fortunate in that, one, we got a very large allocation, and we were in the process of scaling up our program. So we knew that was going to be funding we would spend over a number of years. And then in this previous local budget process in the city of Philadelphia, we were allocated $5 million for Built to Last specifically. So that, we basically were able to get that local support for the work. And that was really because of local advocacy work, right? The folks, as I said, there is a deep, often expressed desire from the local communities and the groups that represent them for repairs. And then specifically for this kind of like climate resilient, long-term affordable kind of work that we are pushing forward with Built to Last. And so that's gotten a ton of traction, and we've seen that really materialize with funding from the city. So it's kind of a little silver lining, but just for us. And we would love to see the state come through and continue that funding moving forward.
Yeah, and I think, obviously we'll continue to talk about funding breeding sources through the webinar series. And I think we are at a time where, some programs sort of started out with American Rescue Plan Act or other, bipartisan infrastructure law funding as a seed. And then looking toward the future, we have potential to partner and bring in things like Solar for All and home energy rebates. So I think this will continue to evolve. I'm going to stop talking though. Alon, thank you so much for responding, and would love to see, Justin, if we've got some questions from the audience that we can reply to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Catherine. We've gotten a lot of great audience questions. I know we're not able to get to all of them, so do our best to consolidate them and get to a few, and then we can follow up with the notes with some responses to some others that we don't get to. I think a great first question would be, we had some questions about braiding in of federal funds, specifically with the IRA and how local implementers can tap into that. So let's start with that question, Alon or Catherine as well, if you'd like.
Yeah, Catherine, do you want to go? No? Okay. Yeah, so in Philadelphia, we are thinking about this two main federal programs. One is Solar for All, which we are hoping will come online in our region in first quarter of next year, fingers crossed. And for that, obviously, that will be mostly paying for solar, and we have the opportunity to pay for the entire solar system, solar costs if we need to, but we could also do heavily subsidized solar leases to just make that really accessible, but still have a bit of buy-in from our clients. And also it pays for some enabling repairs. So if there are minor roof repairs or electrical system repairs, that could also be a new source of funding for that piece of our whole home project. And then the other part that I know many people are thinking about is the home electrification and appliance rebate here that we're also expecting to see in first quarter of 2025 in Pennsylvania. And it is a real, that one's a real challenge in some ways. Some ways it's very easy because it is not actually a layering of funding. It is just taking cost off the top of specific measures. And so some things like electrical wiring, installation, electric panel work, the rebate is really robust and should pay, in a lot of cases, will pay for the entire cost of that measure. Where it becomes more complicated is when we talk about heat pumps, and even though $8,000 is very generous for that instant rebate, it's likely not going to be enough to pay for a whole home heat pump system. And a very serious challenge with these federal dollars is that you cannot use multiple sources of federal dollars to pay for a single measure. So I can't take here rebate and combine that with weatherization or LIHEAP dollars to get to $15,000 system cost. That is the federal government counts that as like kind of double. I guess it's like double counting. I don't know why these are very weird bureaucratic rules, but we basically need to find some unrestricted dollars to blend into that to pay for that measure. So that's something we've been trying to do, as well as find additional sources of of capital that are not restricted. And the $5 million that I mentioned from the city will act as one of those sources. So that's going to help us do a large number of projects. I think that's where I want to end that piece, but there's much more I could say about it. We had more time.
Awesome. Thanks, Alon. I think for this next one, to combine a couple of questions we got on serving some of the clients that are harder to get into a lot of these programs, and not just because of the condition of the homes, but because they're either renters. We got a question about times where there's like challenges with the deed. I know with your model, you're braiding in these existing programs. So I'm curious if there's ways that the flexibility of braiding has helped overcome some of these barriers with the flexibility you have, or if those barriers still remain, and if there's thoughts you have on what could help alleviate those, or strategies you've seen work.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the classic barriers is just that there's a misalignment on the income thresholds for various programs. Weatherization specifically at 200%, I believe, of federal poverty level is significantly lower than our kind of basic systems repair program. And it creates a lot of confusion, I think, in our market for, what, people don't really know exactly what they're going to qualify for, just like when they get started in the process. So that is a very difficult barrier to get around. Obviously, these federal programs, income levels are set. Often, like the weatherization program is written into the CFR. It's like basically would require some legislative changes, I believe, or at least like some pretty sizable program design changes. So that's one that we at the local level can't necessarily change, but I think as a community of practitioners, we can continue to kind of knock on, the federal government, kind of keep pushing for those alignment on those eligibility criteria. That's one piece. Otherwise, I think we are trying to kind of get at everything else, right? If we can help with the applications, if we can help with, overcosts or, just enabling upgrades if that's what's needed. We try to do that through our program.
That's great. Yeah. And can you speak a little bit more specifically to renters? I showed up in a few questions.
Yes, renters. Built to Last is only for homeowners, and we recognize that is a huge limitation. And you should ask, why is it only for homeowners? And the answer is because that's where all the money is. Minus maybe weatherization, but most of our programs, especially the higher capital allocations, are really geared towards homeowners. And creating a program that really serves the rental population is a bit trickier. There's a lot of hesitance to give money to landlords, and there's also a lot of hesitance at to do programs that are driven more from compliance, right? From code compliance, because, there's potential risk to the tenants themselves, being, losing housing or, making housing more unaffordable. So it has been challenging. It's not where we wanted to start, right? Because as complicated as it is, Built to Last is actually the easier program and the easier subset of homes to address. But I can say in Philadelphia, we have a program not run by our office, but by the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation that also runs the basic systems repair program that I keep alluding to. And that's called the Rental Improvement Fund. And it is providing $25,000 forgivable loans for basically for single units in rental properties. And there's some restrictions on, it's basically like a rent control program for a decade for those properties. And that's one way that they're trying to prompt these investments. But at the moment, it doesn't really have restrictions on or requirements for energy efficiency or like health and safety. Like it is almost like open to whatever spending by that property owner. So some work we could be doing there to kind of try to steer towards more affordability as well.
Mhm.
Great. Catherine, do you have time for one more question and then turn it over to you for wrapping up?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Justin.
All right, great. One that actually just came in is a question about bringing private funders to the table to help fill in gaps, augment the program. So, Alon, you may have mentioned this, but if I'm not mistaken, there's some pathways where there are private funds that help support the programs, right? Or if not, is that something that's on the radar or you think there's potential in?
So, can you say that one more time? Private funds for our program or just in general for this type of program?
Yeah, I think open-ended. So I guess one, if there's
Yeah.
ways that private funds are incorporated into your program, if not, can open it up.
When you say private funds, what do you mean here? Like non-federal, if only we could have the speakers, the audience ask this. I want to answer this, but I don't want to answer the wrong question. Why don't I tell you what we're braiding? So obviously, as I've already kind of talked about how we're braiding or layering these existing programs. As far as the funding that we have that we're applying to this to Built to Last ourselves, we have several federal grants on the one hand, so several Department of Energy grants, but we also received funding from several foundations to support this work. And then, as we've talked about, there's the state funding, which is really reappropriated federal dollars, and then the new local funds, which I'm guessing are not what is being asked about from private funding as far as private, but like, have you gotten more clarity on what the private piece is or no? Well, hopefully whoever asked that question, I've answered it, at least come close to answering it, sorry.
Let's see. I can't, it
Yeah,
looks,
so
I'll message Carly and if she still wants to talk, I can, can probably.
Yeah, I can also, if there's big questions that we did not get to, because I know we're at time, I'm happy to, answer those offline. Maybe I can do that through you guys, Catherine and Justin, and when you send out the recording and the report and whatever else is coming to the audience, we can include that.
Yeah, and so we have a couple minutes. Well, I saw one question that I thought would be great for you to answer. It's part of a question that was submitted, but I think it's like a good thing to feature from your program design. It was a question about heirs property being an issue and complicating sometimes intake eligibility. And you guys have done some good work there. So if you'll talk.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry. That is one of the complications. Yeah. So inherited properties and, folks who basically, get grandma's home, but without like a proper deed transfer, that is definitely a big challenge because most programs, and basic systems repair is one of them, does not serve households that do not have like where the occupant is not on the deed. So it needs to be like owned and occupied by the property owner, as stated on the deed. And so That's not something that we, like the Energy Authority, is able to get around ourselves, but we do have a robust legal services, kind of community in Philadelphia. And so what we do when we encounter that is that we don't just say no to our client. We basically refer them over to the legal services group, and then make sure that they come back to us once title is cleared up, and their name is appearing on the deed, and then we can start the project at that point. So it's really, really important to not to avoid saying no whenever we can. That's really our goal.
Yeah. Great. Alon, we are so grateful that you were able to join us and have this conversation. I think, as we all mentioned, we will reply to the questions we didn't have time for, and look forward to continuing that conversation. I know in particular there were some questions that people had about some particular building materials and new energy efficient and electrification appliances. We'll definitely be talking about more in specifics on those topics in future sessions, but we'll reply with resource links as we have them available to share with you, so you have an idea about costs, about construction measures, about how they're being incorporated into whole house models. So just want to acknowledge that we plan to address some of the nuts and bolts of the actual construction work happening in a future session. But thank you so much for joining us, all of you. We look forward to having you in our future. We're going to take a little bit of a break from our series because of Labor Day and many people getting into their back to school routines this time of year. But we'll be back on September 12th for our next session, where we'll be talking about the Trenton program. So I hope everyone has a great afternoon. Look forward to following up with you a couple times by email. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to get in touch with me, Catherine Lee, CLEE @ghhi.org. And Alon, thanks again so much. Look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.